world didn't end with a bang. It began with a beep. At 7:44 a.m. on a quiet spring morning in London, an emergency room fell silent. A nurse leaned over a patient's chart. She clicked once. Nothing. Clicked again. The monitor blinked, then turned blood red. Oops, your files have been encrypted. The demand, pay in Bitcoin. The timer begins. At that exact second, the same message is appearing in hospital wards a continent away. Factory robots freeze mid-assembly in Spain. Government terminals in Russia go dark. This is not a glitch. It is not an accident. Someone has just set off the largest ransomware assault the world had ever seen. And the strangest twist is that the attackers made a blunder so obvious that only one person had to notice to stop the contagion. To understand how the digital nervous system of the planet was brought to its knees that spring morning, you have to rewind 28 days to a leak that ought to have terrified every IT manager and infrastructure czar on Earth. In mid-April, a mysterious collective calling themselves the Shadow Brokers dumped a cache of hacking tools, the crown jewels of a major spy agency's offensive arsenal, onto the open internet. Among the treasures was a weapon called Eternal Blue, an exploit so devastating it functioned like a skeleton key for Windows machines. No password, no interaction, no trace required. An entire class of computers worldwide became instant potential victims. Microsoft had actually discovered the vulnerability weeks earlier and shipped an emergency patch. Problem solved? Not remotely. Human nature and organizational neglect intervened. IT admin fatigue, stubborn legacy systems, yes, entire hospitals, ATMS, factory controllers even ran Windows versions that were no longer supported. And the easy habit of clicking "Remind me later" meant that when the exploit went public, a huge chunk of the world remained exposed. In short, the weapons were on the table, and most of the houses had left the doors open. Somewhere inside North Korea's cyber apparatus, a team of hackers cataloged the opportunity. They took the Eternal Blue exploit, wrapped it in ruthless ransomware code that could encrypt files and demand payment, and then made the attack self-propagating. A worm. Regular ransomware requires someone to open the door. A worm simply walks through walls, finds one vulnerable machine, infects it, and then hunts for the next. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 16. Exponential growth that can reduce entire networks to ticking red screens in minutes. On the morning of May 12th at 7:44 a.m. in the United Kingdom, a London hospital doctor prepares for surgery and discovers life or death charts are inaccessible. The ransom note looks almost contemptuous. $300 in Bitcoin, double after 3 days, gone after a week. Across the National Health Service, critical systems falter. Appointments and surgeries are postponed, cancer treatments delayed. It's not just hospitals. Telephone networks, automotive plants, and freight tracking systems are hit. Production lines stall, robotic arms hang motionless over half-built cars. International couriers can't reconcile packages. Inventories go blind. A supply chain that relies on just-in-time rhythms jitters toward collapse. WannaCry, as the world would call the outbreak, spreads like wildfire. By midday, security teams call it the worst cyber attack in history. The infection count is doubling every hour. If nothing intervenes, many feared every vulnerable Windows machine on Earth could be encrypted within days. Governments scramble. Antivirus firms pour resources. Microsoft rushes emergency patches, even taking the almost unthinkable step of backporting fixes to obsolete operating systems, because the alternative is unacceptable. Enter an unlikely protagonist, a 22-year-old from a tiny seaside town in Devon, England. He was a college dropout, sleeping in his childhood bedroom, wearing a Star Wars t-shirt. He reversed malware for fun. When a friend pinged him about the burgeoning outbreak, he downloaded a sample into a sandbox, a safe, simulated environment for running malicious code. As the malware unraveled on his screen, something in the code pinged his curiosity. A nonsensical string of characters, a junk-looking domain. That oddity was a deliberate censor. The malicious code had been designed to check whether that gibberish domain resolved on the internet. If it did, the worm would assume it was running inside a researcher's simulated environment and halt. If it did not, the worm would proceed to spread. Why would the attackers put in such a mechanism? To evade detection. Analysts who reverse malware often execute it in sandboxes that emulate the internet. If an impossible domain appears to exist inside the sandbox, It signals a trap. Stop running to avoid analysis. But the attackers had overlooked a crucial detail. He did something audacious and profoundly simple. He bought the domain, then dozens, then hundreds per second. Within a heartbeat, the worm's kill switch tripped. The global spread stopped. The red dots on dashboards stopped multiplying. The catastrophe that had been racing toward planetary scale paused, as if some invisible hand had lifted it mid-stride. Journalists called the kid a hero. The security community breathed. Microsoft thanked him. Governments wanted answers. But the narrative beyond the applause was darker and more complicated. For one thing, the hero had gratuitously revealed his intervention with a registration trace that could be followed, effectively painting a target on his back. He would later find himself in legal trouble for unrelated past activities, and the headlines would become complicated. That mismatch started people asking, why the chaos? The forensic trail led investigators to a chilling conclusion. Technical overlaps in the codebase linked the operation to prior campaigns tied to a state-sponsored unit. Strings, variable names, even typos matched earlier toolkits connected to a notorious hacking group. The fingerprint was unmistakable. Intelligence agencies and cybersecurity centers across multiple countries issued a rare, unified judgment. A nation-state with limited means but outsized ambition had struck. It was North Korea. That reality sent a new tingle down global spines. North Korea had already been linked to extortion and bank heists in cyberspace. Operations run by a shadowy intelligence organ intent on earning hard currency for a sanctioned regime. But WannaCry looked less like a typical criminal campaign and more like a loud, indiscriminate test. It might have been a proof of concept, a demonstration that the tools leaked from a spy agency could be turned around and used to weaponize global infrastructure. A small state, with the ruthlessness to experiment on a wide scale, had shown it could hobble commerce, healthcare, and the systems that keep modern life moving. The consequences were immediate and ongoing. Nations began to rethink how they defended critical infrastructure, how quickly they pushed patches, and how fragile the supposed backbone of daily life truly was. Ransomware evolved. It's relatively straightforward to sanction a regime after the fact. Much harder to stop distributed, low-cost cyber operations that can be launched from far beyond a nation's borders or hidden behind proxies. There's an even darker coda. After the attack, intelligence analysts began to see North Korea's cyber cadre expand and professionalize. They linger, silent in networks, waiting for a political trigger to be activated. The real fear wasn't that we'd seen an attack like WannaCry, it was that we'd seen the prototype of something far worse. Yet within this bleak story, there's a persistent ember of human contradiction. The young man who bought a domain for a few hundred quid and stopped a planetary scale outbreak later faced prosecutors for other alleged transgressions. The person who saved billions of dollars and potentially lives was not rewarded in a simple moral arc. Instead, his life was complicated, his motives debated, his legal status precarious. So what do we take away now, years later? A handful of hard lessons stand out. First, software rot creates strategic fragility. Unpatched systems are not merely a business risk, they are national security liabilities. Second, offense scales cheaply in cyberspace, and asymmetry favors the nimble. Even when technical and linguistic evidence coalesces, geopolitical claims will be argued. Finally, the human factor, curiosity, courage, and sheer chance can tip the outcome from catastrophe to contained crisis. The WannaCry saga is a parable for our digital age. One leak, one exploit, one lazy update, and the world can be put on pause. If this tale grabbed you, the panic, the improbable savior, the geopolitics wrapped in zeros and ones, tell me what you think. Drop a comment with your wildest cyber attack movie idea. Hit like if you want more deep dives like this. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story from the shadowy border where tech, power, and human nature collide.